Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think I've just done the impossible. I have done a lot of theory videos on this channel. I like to talk about random shit and random series, random theories, and random ideas about what could happen in whatever series I decide to talk about that day. And Berserk is one of the main highlights, as you know. It's one of the things I like to talk about most. So, one day I sat down and I was like, remember that God chapter that Berserk had? Chapter 83 that Kentaro Miura himself said would be a spoiler for the ending of Berserk? I went and looked at that chapter for about the 83rd time. And once reading that chapter, I thought to myself, what could all of this stuff mean? And I thought. And after a few hours, I was left with a 2-page essay of just jot notes to talk about this video. And now here I am talking about the Berserk theory that I have come up with. This is unlike any other Berserk theory you have ever seen. This is not some regular Berserk theory. This is a huge collection of ideas that I have come up with, that some other people may have come up with on Reddit, on YouTube, on any other website, but it's a collection of ideas that talks about somewhat the end of Berserk, but mostly one of the key events, or I should say multiple key events that are going to happen in the story of Berserk that will lead to the ending of Berserk. I decided to call this theory the God theory because after all, it has a lot to do with God, and trust me, the amount of times I say God in this video is going to be close to 83 times. I hope you're as excited to watch this video as I am to bring it to you. It took literally about a day of thinking, but here is the Berserk God theory, and here's everything I've come up with so far. If you have any additions to this theory, drop them in the comments, make videos of your own, post stuff on Reddit, post stuff on Twitter, and tag me on Twitter at @rvs_. I'm genuinely curious to see what you guys come up with. This theory is very interesting, and I know some smart ass people out there are gonna come up with something that's gonna make it even crazier. Anyways, let's talk about Berserk's God theory. So this theory centers around the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. I don't think I've ever talked about Nietzsche on my channel. I've talked about Jung a few times in my Berserk video specifically, and in this video specifically, which was almost entirely dedicated to Jung's works. But this video is solely on Nietzsche, and the reason for that is because Nietzsche himself has a huge influence on the story of Berserk, and this is seen in the God chapter, which I have mentioned already a number of times in this video. So if you are looking to add on to this theory, I recommend reading the God chapter, the chapters that come before and after it, and researching into Friedrich Nietzsche's works. Now, let's talk about the first main point of this theory. So Nietzsche's most popular belief, and what really got him to be the famous philosopher and psychoanalyst that he was, is his theory of God's death. He believed that God would die as a result of Western culture no longer believing in its existence, and what would result in people not believing in God would be the rise of totalitarianism in the 20th century. And as we see in the 20th century, a lot of crazy shit happened, a lot of totalitarian madness, and as Nietzsche predicted, hundreds of millions of deaths in just one century due to war, due to totalitarianism, and due to his main theory of the death of God. So this shit is legit. Nietzsche's theory of the death of God is actually a thing, and it's one of the most popular theories in philosophy, and it's such a heavy topic to discuss. This theory alone has a huge influence on the story of Berserk, and it's shown in the God chapter that I've mentioned numerous times already in the video, the God of the Abyss 2 chapter 83 of Berserk, and the chapter that Kentaro Miura himself said contained a lot of spoilers and a lot of clues as to where the story of Berserk would go. So keep that in mind as well. Miura himself said this chapter was big if you wanted to know what the ending of Berserk was going to be like, and as a result it became sort of like the Phantom chapter, where it didn't even exist in a lot of websites and a lot of publishing magazines, and it didn't even get published, I'm pretty sure, because if you look at the God chapter and the way the art looks, it is vastly different to the chapters before and after it. Anyways, the central belief of God in the 19th century for the longest time was that God is eternal and therefore God cannot die. However, Nietzsche came along in the middle of the 19th century and completely threw this doctrine in the garbage, proposing this: God is dead. That's it. That claim alone has an endless amount of meaning behind it, and that's why this theory is such a big theory, because of the immense amount of meaning behind those three words: God is dead. In summary, what it means, so a little TLDR for you, is that God is a fiction created by humans, and thus God dies when there is no good reason to believe God exists. Friedrich Nietzsche. In God of the Abyss 2, you can see Griffith being surprised at the idea of humans believing in God. So this was something again that Nietzsche came up with, was the idea that humans created God. Not that God created humans, but it was vice versa. And it's again in this chapter where we see this throwback to what Nietzsche believed in the Berserk chapters. So clearly Kentaro Miura was as inspired by Nietzsche, if not more inspired by Nietzsche, as he was with Jung. And if you want to know about Jung, watch this video here. Another large resemblance to Nietzsche's theories was the idea of why God was even created in the first place. This is another thing that relates to Berserk and how Berserk talks about Nietzsche's findings. And in Berserk it says that God was created. In this chapter it says God was created for the sole reason of humans trying to justify their meaningless suffering that they suffer day to day and throughout their lives. Nietzsche believed this as well, and he believed that again God is a fiction created by humans, and the reason he's a fiction created by humans and the reason humans created this image of God within their minds was to justify their meaningless suffering. This idea that God has been created so humans could justify their suffering makes a lot of sense. Why do people pray to God to have better lives? Why do they ask God whenever something bad happens? How many instances have you seen where something bad happens to someone, let's say a family member of theirs tragically passes away, and how many times do you see them blaming God for this? How many times do you ask God for forgiveness when you commit a sin? Why would you ask this deity, this figure, for forgiveness because of something you yourself did? It's because you don't want to suffer. It's because you don't want punishment. And because if you pray to God, you believe to yourself that you will not suffer. And that idea that God exists psychologically heals you so that you do not suffer day to day, and so that you do not keep in your head the idea that one day you're going to die and nothing will remain of you. You don't want to have in your head the idea that one day your loved ones are all going to die and they're never going to be on this world after that. You want to invent the idea that there is heaven, there is a kingdom of God where people, dead loved ones that you had, could rest in peace, could be peaceful, could have better lives in the afterlife than they did in the real life. And of course, you yourself don't want to perish forever. You want to live forever in the kingdom of God, live in peace. And that is the reason for heaven being created, similar to the reason for God being created. I do have respect and sympathy, heavy respect and sympathy for those who believe in God and those who are into the idea of God, because I believe it's an incredible method of meditation and stoicism. I truly do respect the people who believe in God. But getting back on track, another idea is the idea of hell. Why does hell exist? It's because people want a reason to not do sinful acts, because they believe if they do sinful acts they will go to hell. And so hell was created so that they would not do sinful acts. And the religious people didn't want to do sinful acts because they believed that God would punish them by throwing them into hell. That's why hell was created and heaven was created, as I mentioned. So this idea that God and the many things that come along with God were created because of humans' suffering and the tragedies that befell them throughout their lives, and that alone is the reason for God's existence and why we humans, well, some humans, believe in God heavily. And Nietzsche's idea of God is dead in the Western society was that when people stopped believing in God, they became more sinful because they had nothing to fear. They fell into nihilism, where they believed life had no meaning. And the essential meaning of nihilism, which was in fact coined by Friedrich Nietzsche, was that life has no meaning. And that's what a lot of people now in Western society unfortunately believe, because of a lack of belief in God. Now that I have gone off on a tangent for about 6 minutes, let's go back to the Berserk theory. Now, God in Berserk is described as the idea of evil, but how will Griffith really match that idea of evil? Because at the current moment, Griffith doesn't seem to the people like an evil person. To us, of course, he's the most evil person, but to the people that worship him in Midland, in his kingdom, he does not seem evil. He seems the exact opposite. By becoming the idea of good, because the original idea of God, which was proposed by the religious groups of ancient times, was that God himself was the idea of good. So God himself was a virtuous man, and that he was in fact the idea of good, and good itself. However, an interesting thing in Berserk is that the God that we see is the idea of evil. Now, there might be a misunderstanding, and it's because of the fact that the heart that we see here is not in fact God. It is a part of God. It is literally a fraction of God. It is, I guess you could say, the heart. Get it? The heart of God. It literally is the heart of God. And the reason for that is the thing that keeps God breathing and existing in the minds of people is the idea of evil. And that is why the heart is personified as the idea of evil. So do you kind of understand what that means? The idea of evil is what keeps God going, and it's what keeps God's heart pumping, which is why God's heart is displayed as the idea of evil. And it is the reason that God was born in the first place. Now, the main basis of this theory theory is that Griffith will become God, or will become the new God. And this is shown obviously already in the Kingdom of Midland, where the people worship Griffith already quite literally as a god. And so because of that, Griffith already has established the persona of a god. So it isn't very hard for him to quite literally become the leader of the world and to become the god that everyone worships. But to even further that theory and that stance, it is shown here in the God chapter that this idea of evil itself controls destiny and controls causality, and as a result it forged the past and forged the times so that Griffith would be created in this time, in this place, and as this person, so that he could fulfill a role. It says all the encounters you have had so far were a part of the destiny that led you here, and it talks about all the encounters, everything that Griffith has gone through, and how all of these things were done by him so that Griffith could be here now. He had manipulated history, he had merged blood with blood, he had influenced the lower levels of human consciousness, which is again a throwback to Carl Jung and the collective unconscious. And rightfully so, Griffith asks God, what does he want from him? And God says simply, be as you will. I dwell deep in your heart, I am a part of you. You are a part of your kind's consciousness, a part of me. Listen to this part right here. You are a part of your kind's consciousness, a part of me. What makes up the large majority of God in Berserk? It is the collective unconscious of people. The collective unconscious is that swirling sea that we see here in the God chapter, and if that swirling sea is the largest part of God, that basically means that it's everyone's collective unconscious, the unconscious of everyone living, that swells in those depths and that becomes God itself. So a quick rundown on the collective unconscious. Basically, Carl Jung believed that everyone deep down has similar memories and similar ideas in their brain, stored way deep down in their unconscious minds, which all connects together from ancestral times, and through their ancestral DNA, it all connects back to one mind and one brain. So in other words, we kind of all share an unconscious brain. And that unconscious brain has in it the idea of suffering and the idea of fear and the worries that humanity suffers day to day. And that is why the collective unconscious is God, because again, God was created from those worries and from that fear of suffering. So if Griffith is part of his kind's unconscious, or collective unconscious, or consciousness as said here, if Griffith is part of this swirling realm that is literally God, that means that Griffith is in everyone's collective unconscious, and that means that Griffith is God. You see what I mean? Your desire is my desire as well. Your actions themselves shall prove to be suitable for your kind as a whole. May they bring pain or salvation to mankind. Do as you will, chosen one. These words tie again more into the fact that this heart is working with Griffith. Why is the heart working with Griffith? Because Griffith is God. And because the heart is the heart of God, that heart is Griffith's heart. And listen, this is, oh my goodness. Griffith asks the heart for wings, and the heart says that Griffith can have anything he desires as long as he does as he wishes. Griffith wishes for wings. His heart, right? His heart desires wings. He wants wings. And so his heart grants him wings. Do you see what I mean here? Griffith really seems like the God in this situation. And it says here, take with you the power of the feelings this world is filled with, and change this physical field so that your body is into a shape that is suitable for your task. And that shape is Femto himself. And that is where the chapter ends, with Griffith hovering above the swirls of the human unconscious, showing that Griffith is in the realm of the human unconscious, which is another thing that the heart mentioned, that the idea of evil quite literally said Griffith is in the consciousness of every living human individual. And that may be why the people of Midland saw flashbacks of a bird flying around at certain times, right? Because the bird is in the consciousness of the people in Midland. That is why when Fantasia was created, everyone felt these weird things. You saw that panel, the incredible panel with Guts, just feeling everything coming in from Fantasia. It is because Griffith is implanted in everyone's consciousness. And because of that, Griffith plays the role of God, and he is quite literally the God of Berserk. Now, as I mentioned, God is created as the idea of suffering, and he is created because humans suffer, and Griffith is something that people go to stop their suffering because he's God. So we can refer to Griffith and God synonymously throughout the rest of the video. But people view Griffith as God, and they go to Griffith because they want reasons for their suffering, because they don't want to suffer anymore. Now, who's the number one sufferer in Berserk and in manga in general? It's my boy Guts. Guts contrasts this idea so beautifully with how he embraces the suffering. He strives in the suffering because of the fact that he knows, and that Nietzsche had this theory himself, again tying in with Nietzsche, that suffering was the way to success. Because in order to be great, in order to achieve great things, you must embrace the suffering and use that suffering as energy. And that's exactly what Guts has done. Whereas Griffith is the exact opposite of that for everyone else. So there's a juxtaposition of Guts and Griffith once again that we see just a countless number of times in Berserk, which makes the two characters absolutely magnificent. The discipline of suffering or great suffering. Do you not know that only this discipline has created all enhancements of man so far? Friedrich Nietzsche, Beyond Good and Evil, 225. So now here we get into a very interesting part of the theory, and this is something that everyone has been talking about with how Griffith is going to betray the Godhand. My idea of this stance, based on this theory, is that Griffith has sort of already betrayed the Godhand, but he's going to go even further. Now let me explain myself here, because I know that sounds like absolute blasphemy. So if Griffith is the one to control destiny because he is God, right? God, the idea of evil controls destiny. Because Griffith is God, he controls destiny, sort of thing, right? Then it may be possible for Griffith to manipulate the Godhand and use them for his own benefit. So Griffith can do that if he wants to, assuming that he is the God right now. But think about it, right? It's in the name. The Godhand are the hands of God. So whatever God desires, the Godhand must desire as well, because they are part of God. So in other words, Griffith is not really a member of the Godhand. More so, he is the leader, quote unquote, of the Godhand because he is God. Now that begs the question, who is the fifth Godhand member? Good question. I don't really know, but if I had to guess, Femto could still be the fifth Godhand member, but Griffith, as in Griffith in his human form, is the God. Do you see what I mean? Griffith may have created Femto so that he serves his own purpose. And oh my goodness, bro, I literally came up with this on the dot, okay? Femto was created by Griffith so that Griffith could use Femto to achieve what he wants. Because again, God can't do anything by itself. God is simply the being. God needs a hand to do the work for him. So God uses the hand, which is the God hand, and Femto to achieve what he wants. So because Griffith, or I guess God, wanted to create Fantasia, he used Femto as a catalyst to create Fantasia. Do you see where I'm going with this? The hands of God, and God being Griffith. So if that is the case, then that means Griffith has full control over the God hand, and he can do whatever he likes to the God hand. He can throw them in the garbage, he can kill them, which he obviously won't because he needs them. He needs a hand to use. But whatever the God hand are doing are driven by Griffith. So whatever Griffith wants, the God hand will want as well. I know this video is already ridiculously long, but let's go even deeper into this. Let's talk about the idea of sacrifice in Berserk. So the idea of sacrifice in Berserk may directly or indirectly come from the Bible. And warning, I'm not a specialist of the Bible. I'm not even a Christian. I'm not a believer in Christianity. None of that. I'm just a simple random dude who's listened to Jordan Peterson videos on the Bible and knows a bit about the Bible. So here's something that happens in the Bible, and here's a story from the Bible. So what happens is that the sons of Adam and Eve, which I'm sure you've heard of, the two original people on earth, the two first founders of humanity, I guess you could say, Cain and Abel, their two sons, are told to make sacrifices to God, right? So this is where the origin of sacrifice first comes from. Cain is rewarded for his sacrifices because sacrificing was believed to give them rewards. God said, I will reward you if you sacrifice to me. I think that's what happens. And Cain and Abel both sacrifice. Cain receives many things, but Abel does not receive pretty much anything. And this is the idea of evil in the Bible. Not the idea of evil as in Berserk, but the reason evil came to being was because of sacrifices that had no outcome, that had no reward. And because Abel got no rewards, unlike his brother Cain, he became extremely envious of his brother Cain and ended up killing him. So that's sort of the story of sacrifice and where it originated from. Devout believers in Christianity and other religions that follow the Bible or that follow similar stories to the Bible, as you know, ancient religions, they sacrifice lambs at the altar, they sacrifice different things at the altar, they sent it up to God because they believe that if they sent things up to God, God will reward them. And the same idea shows itself in Berserk. Once a human sacrifices his soul to the gods, to the God-hand, the God-hand bestow upon him the power of a demon, the power of a, literally like a god. Now this presents a very interesting idea. Griffith just sacrificed the Band of the Hawk and that is it. That seems like a basic sacrifice to gain the power of a normal apostle. Okay, he has the Crimson Bailet, maybe he gets the power to become a God-hand member. But what entails the fact that Griffith will become God? How does Griffith become God when no other people with the Crimson Bailet have become God before him? That's something to think about. Maybe, just maybe, Griffith has sacrificed something that he doesn't know he has yet sacrificed that will lead to his downfall. That is something very interesting to think about, because everything comes with a sacrifice, and that is the belief of the Bible, I think, and that is heavily implemented in Berserk. Now, if Griffith himself does not desire humans to sacrifice for him, he does not want humans to give him things, he doesn't care about like sacrificing and all that, he kind of betrays the Godhand in that way as well, because the Godhand then don't need to make eclipses, then don't need to control people so that they have Baylits and things like that. Griffith doesn't need Baylits, right? So there wouldn't really be eclipses moving forward, so that completely ignores causality, that completely goes against the Godhand, and so the Godhand are rendered completely useless. And we haven't seen the Godhand in a very long time, so there may be a reason for that too, right? The Godhand are useless, we haven't seen them in a long time. You kind of get where I'm going with that? So instead of having the apostles eat during the Great Feast, Griffith would instead bring them into the world of the living, as he already has, and have them live in harmony with humans like a real god would do. And now, the end of Berserk. Bro, I don't know what to title this video. Do I title it The God Theory? Do I title it This is How Berserk Will End? Okay, the end of Berserk will somehow have Griffith dying because he is God. Now, I'm not sure if this is going to be metaphorically dying, as in he becomes irrelevant, or if it's Griffith will literally be impaled. Like, I don't know what it's really going to be like, but I have an idea that Griffith is going to die. Again, this was Nietzsche's prediction, God will die. So Griffith at the end of Berserk will have to die. Now, here's why. There's a good reason for this. If Griffith creates a world of eternal peace, which it definitely seems like he's going to create a world of eternal peace, right? Griffith would think that if he creates a world of eternal peace, everyone would worship him, he'd get his kingdom, he'd get everything he'd ever wanted. However, as Nietzsche said, if there's no longer a reason for God to exist, if there is no longer a reason for humans to suffer any longer, if humans don't suffer anymore, if there's no worry about suffering, God will die. And so if Griffith creates a world of peace and prosperity, then there's no need for him being God, right? People are like thankful for him, everything like that, but they no longer worship him because they're assured the idea that they're at peace, and so there's no suffering in their lives, and so God dies. So he may metaphorically die, as in the idea that nobody worships him anymore, or this may entail him losing his powers, because if he's no longer God, then he no longer has these godlike powers, which allows for Guts to kill him, which is another possibility for the ending of Berserk. If you somehow watched the entire video all the way to the ending, my god, you are an absolute legend, and I thank you so much for this. I don't know how I came up with this theory. It was a very interesting experience. This just goes to show, when you really sit down and think about things, you can come up with some crazy shit, and you can become the next Friedrich Nietzsche. Shout out to my boy Nietzsche from 250 years ago for coming up with this genius theory. This is the Berserk theory, the Berserk God theory, and the theory of how Berserk will eventually end. Hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you think of the theory in the comments. Don't flame me too much. That's it for me. Thank you so much for watching once again, and peace.